Good afternoon or good evening, wherever you're tuning in from. I'm Yvonne Kim, Executive Director of Asia Society Korea. Welcome and thanks for joining us today. I'm very pleased to collaborate with Asia Society Southern California to host today's webinar. Technology has allowed our global centers to work together during this challenging time, and for that, we are very grateful. I would like to also take this opportunity to acknowledge our promotional partners, Korean American Foundation of San Francisco, Korean American Center, Korean Cultural Center, Los Angeles, and UCLA Center for Korean Studies. Today, we have nearly 300 friends and members tuning in from 16 countries to join the discussion about what made K-pop and BTS the huge global success they are today. Bands like BTS and Blackpink are selling out in countless international stadiums within seconds, and now the worldwide explosion of K-pop and superstars like BTS have proven that pop speaks every language. Please allow me to introduce today's distinguished guest speakers. First, we have Jae Chung, an Asian super producer with over 70 million albums worldwide. I personally remember being a huge fan of his group Solid back in the days. Solid was the first R&B group in South Korea. Since then, he has been focusing on the Asian music scene by writing and producing songs for various international artists in Asia. And he also took part in launching the first hip-hop entertainment company in Taiwan. We also have Tamar Herman with us today. Ms. Herman is currently with the South China Morning Post, and she's been covering K-pop and related content for many years. She's also the managing editor and co-founder of Scene, a website dedicated to creating unique content for fans of the Korean entertainment industry. She released her first book, BTS, Blood, Sweat, and Tears in August last year. Lastly, we have Dr. Youngdae Kim, a music critic and ethnomusicologist who serves as a member of the selection committee for the Korean Music Awards. He's been studying music while closely observing American pop music trends and the development of global K-pop sensations for over a decade. He's the author of multiple publications in Korea, including BTS The Review, a comprehensive look at the music of BTS. Today's conversation will be moderated by our friend Bernie Cho, the president of DFSB Kollective, which is one of the first and foremost K-pop music exporters. Bernie has worked for decades in the Korean music TV industry as a creative planner, program producer, and show host. The discussion will last about 35 minutes, then we'll move to Q&A. May I please ask those of you in the audience to please submit your questions through the Q&A box at any time. Without further ado, I will now hand over the mic to our moderator, Bernie Cho. Bernie, it's all yours now.
Welcome. Thank you, everybody, for joining this webinar. It would have been amazing and awesome if we could have done this in person. But in many ways, doing this online, worldwide, all at once, really kind of encapsulates sort of what a year it's been for not just BTS, but K-pop as a whole. What I'd like to do is to start off by sort of doing a year in review for us to understand the present and the future of BTS and K-pop and beyond. We need to take a look at the past, and what I mean by the past, the very recent past, 2020. If we could get the slide to pop up, that would be great. Are we good with the slide? Okay, excellent. So yes, so today's topic is BTS and beyond, and as Yvonne was kind enough to introduce all of our distinguished panelists and speakers, what I'd like to do is to go to the next slide. 2020, the year in review. Obviously, for many K-pop fans around the world, the next slide, please. The 2021 Grammy Awards was really a testament and more importantly, a statement about how far BTS and more importantly, K-pop has come onto the global stage. Although many music critics and fans alike were hoping that BTS would get multiple nominations, the fact is they received a nomination, their first nomination in a major category, which was for Best Pop Duo Group Performance. Although there were a lot of people betting and hoping and praying and possibly maybe even crying that they would win the award. Unfortunately, it was not going to be their night, but it's not going to be their last night either, because many people in the industry feel that this is probably the first of many Grammy nomination opportunities for BTS. But what's really important is sort of in the midst of the hype and the hysteria of BTS getting this very prestigious nomination, we can't forget the fact is that it was a good year for Asian American and Korean American artists at the Grammys. The next slide, please. So although BTS did not win in the category, 3 outstanding Asian American acts, Her, who is a Filipina American, she won for Song of the Year, I Can't Breathe. Anderson .Paak won in the category for melodic rap performance for his song Lockdown. And last but not least, the Korean American violinist Richard O'Neill won for Best Classical Instrumental Solo for, and this is a tongue twister, Theophantus Concierto for viola and chamber orchestra. But regardless, these are 3 outstanding Asian American artists who actually won at the Grammys this year. And the reason I bring this up is that BTS is part of a bigger picture that we're going to touch upon and talk about today. The next slide, please. Unfortunately, the aspect ratio on these slides were done on widescreen instead of this, but please bear with me. Recently, after the Grammy Awards, the IFPI, which is a tongue-twisting acronym for the International Federation of the Phonographic Industry, which is another way of saying the FIFA, what FIFA is to soccer around the world, the IFPI is to the music industry. And they put out their global music report a few weeks ago. And what came out of this global music report was the astounding performance and, more importantly, the power of K-pop in 2020. Many of us in the industry knew it was a good year, perhaps a great year, but we did not know just how big of a year it was until recently. For the 4th year in a row, Korea stood strong as the 6th largest music market in the world. And to really understand and grasp just how big of a music superpower Korea has become, it is nearly 2 times bigger than the Canadian music industry, the Australian music industry, and it's actually slightly bigger than the entire music industry of Latin America. In Asia, it's actually bigger than China. It's 4 times bigger than the entire Southeast Asia region, and is nearly 5 times bigger than the Indian music market. But what was really interesting and really fascinating was Korea was the #1 music market in the world for 2020 when it came to growth. Year-on-year growth from 2019 to 2020 was the fastest in the world for a major music market. Korea did 44.8% growth, which is nearly 6 times bigger growth than the entire global music industry. Next slide, please. And if we dig deep and dive deep on how well K-pop did, Blackpink, they had a phenomenal year. They emerged as the #1 female band in the world. They had the 5th best-selling album in the world and had the 12th best-selling album, all formats, physical and digital, in the world for 2020. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. And then BTS. We knew they did well, but we had no idea how massive it was until the numbers came out. They were the #1 best-selling artist in the world, bar none, hands down. And they also had not just the #1, they had 4 albums in the global top 20 last year. They were the #1 global artists by the IFPI for 2020. They had the #1 album on all formats, the #1 best-selling album, the #2 best-selling album as well. And the song Dynamite was the 10th best-selling digital single in the world. Next slide, please. And what we saw was that K-pop is no longer just Asian pop music. It has emerged as one of the most popular international pop music genres in the world. In fact, if we just look at the top 20 global album sales chart, 30% of the top 20 albums of 2020 were K-pop albums. And the significance of this number is as follows. Korea matched the US in terms of the number of top 20 best-selling albums in the world. And while Australia and Canada and the UK each had an artist in the top 20. Korea had 6 albums in the top 20 last year. The next slide. And to put that into perspective, it wasn't just a good year for Korea, it was a great year for Japan, as well as a breakthrough year for China. While Korea had 6 albums in the top 20, Japan had 4 albums and China had 1 album. So combined, 11 out of the top 20 best-selling albums in the world last year came from Asia. And so what we're starting to see for 2020 and more importantly, 2021 and beyond is a new Far East movement. I had to put that out there and a shout out to the guys over at FM. But the reality is that we are seeing some very interesting trends emerge in the global music space. And so without further ado, the next slide, we will now lean in and lean into our 3 esteemed panelists and speakers today. Jae Chong, Asian music extraordinaire, who has spent many years, both as an artist, as a producer as well, trying to break out and break through Asian acts onto the global stage. Tamar Herman, who has evolved from a very prodigious blogger to now a very respected journalist. And last but not least, Korea's version of Dr. Dre, Dr. Youngdae Kim, who is not only a leading music critic, but also an esteemed member of the Korean Music Awards selection committee, and also the author of a book called BTS, The Review. And so without further ado, I wanted to welcome all of our 3 guests, panelists and speakers. And what I want to do is just start with a really simple question for each of you. Is obviously all of you have an emotional attachment, an emotional investment to K-pop. But for the most part, K-pop was always kind of a local music phenomena, a local music market. For each of you, when did you see and when did you sense that K-pop had the potential to break out and break through into overseas markets? What was that epiphany moment that you're thinking, oh boy, this could get big? Jay, why don't we start with you, because you're sitting right next to me on the screen.
Hello, everybody. For me, I think it was like around 2010 or 9, I think, was the beginning. I think, to be honest with you, I think before 2009, I didn't really believe it was actually going to happen. Obviously we've tried to make music, for a couple of decades before that to even go outside of Korea at any capacity. But in 2009 and 2010, I think it was like when Girls' Generation, Super Junior, the whole the flash mob in France, all that stuff. When that stuff was happening, we were like, wow, is this really going to happen? And I think that's when we started to really sort of be on an upward trend. And in 2012, I think, was the real breakout, like for K-pop, including Japan, China, Southeast Asia, and then slowly out to the West.
And how about you, Tamar? You were, for the most part, based in New York. How did you discover and fall in love with K-pop? And again, as a fan, when did you, but more importantly, as a journalist, when did you sense that something was bubbling, something was happening, something was literally and figuratively about the pop?
Hi, everybody. Please let me know if my video goes out. I've been having some issues with Zoom, so I just switched to my phone. But yeah, as you mentioned, I grew up in the US, and I kind of found out about K-pop around the time that Jay was just talking about, when YouTube was kind of really blowing up a lot of second generation K-pop artists in 2008, 2009, going viral across the world. And YouTube was kind of bringing it to a lot more fans. And I think it took a few years, but I was in high school when that was going on. And then by the time I got to college, I think it was quite apparent to both fans and industry watchers that something was, going to happen. There were a lot of attempts by various companies, like big companies like JYP and SM, to kind of bring artists to the US. But at the same time as the companies were looking at things, fans were looking at things, and the fan audience wasn't going away, and it was continuing to engage in the US. And so, by the time I graduated college in 2014, it was quite apparent that, the interest is here and it's not going away. And media entities in the US had already kind of caught onto that. So like Billboard had launched their K-pop column. MTV had a very short-lived Korea-focused outlet. So just there was a lot of interest at the time. And I think like in that span, it kind of became apparent. And then since then we've seen, you know, it just continue to grow and grow, so that like kind of the hints have now like of the seeds have kind of like flourished into what we're seeing nowadays. And it's been really cool to watch.
Tamar, real quick question. What was the first K-pop song or video that made you go, oh, this is interesting? You never answered that question before, so I'm going to put you on the spot.
Really? I feel like I talk about this a lot. It was Wonder Girls. It was either Tell Me or So Hot. It was one of those two. I remember seeing it. This is like super embarrassing. It was on a Perez Hilton blog when I was in high school. I had like, you know, Perez was where we all got our teenage entertainment news at the time. And I had been talking to some friends about like K-pop, and I saw this article, so I clicked on it and I was like, oh, this is cool. I like pop. So that was, it was Wonder Girls.
Okay, good to know. And Dr. Kim, you being an insider and obviously being in Korea, but also you've spent some time overseas, you know, in the Seattle on the West Coast. Where, but more importantly, when was the moment that you felt K-pop actually had not just export potential, but more importantly, a potential to really make some major moves in the international music scene, international music space?
Well, pretty similar, I think, around 2007, 8, 9, there were kind of big surge of K-pop bands, and not just within the Asia, but into US and American and Latin American market. So Big Bang, Dongbang 21. I had this one episode during my first lecture at the University of Washington. It was actually an American pop music class, and several group of students came up to me after the first introduction of the class, and they excitedly were talking about how sexy Taeyang was and how charming K-pop bands were. So for me, as Asian, not Asian American, but Asian, who just arrived in United States, that was really, you know, shocking moment, honestly, because honestly, for me back then, 2007, I was one of the people who actually suspicious about this whole Hallyu thing, because I never left my country before 2007. So I thought back then, well, this is just a media, you know, play, and it's not really that big. But at that moment, it's kind of symbolic moment that I was wrong, because they already talk about the sexual attraction and the charm of K-pop group. It's not from same Asian group of people. I mean, it was from Latin American people. It's from Black people. It's from Caucasian people. So I thought that was the first moment that I truly believe the potential of K-pop as a global music. But also I want to add, since we talk about the global potential of Korean pop music, I want to go back to back in 1990s. There was this group named Solid back then. Many people call them a first R&B group in K-pop, but it was actually, I mean, I'm not saying this because Jae is here, but it was more of a kind of prototype of K-pop, or kind of global K-pop group format at the time. You know, 3 Korean American from California who can produce, rap, sing. Well, I vividly remember I purchased their first album, not the second album that made the biggest hit, but the first album. But back then, I vaguely started to believe that Korean pop is not just about Korean, you know, native Korean doing music in South Korea, because it's already crossed the border. You know, it's already transnational for me. So that was, one of my memories.
So, Dr. Kim, I think it's safe to say for many of us in the industry, whether artists, producers, executives, critics, journalists, obviously, I think none of us expected Psy was going to be that that breakout act. If you were able to open a Las Vegas betting line in 2008, 2009, as to which K-pop act you thought was going to be that breakout hit, who would have been your, say, top 3 choices of being potential breakout hit?
Well, at the time, well, I thought 21 had a shot, and they were successful in a way, and Big Bang as well, and it's before BTS, but I thought BAP as a kind of new model of K-pop who can rap really well, and the music is really raw, and the performance is really great. So I thought those groups, especially in the US market, had a shot, at the time.
And then working backwards, Tamar, in your opinion, as you were covering, the emergence of K-pop from the US, what acts did you sort of have on your short list in terms of these might be the ones?
Definitely the ones that he just mentioned, but also, at the time, I remember staying in my, I guess not late because I was a college student, but I remember seeing Girls' Generation on Letterman and just like being like, oh, this is interesting. But yeah, Big Bang, 21, BAP, yeah, Girls' Generation had had an ad in Times Square, and I just remember being like really impressed as like a New Yorker. I was like, oh wow. A few others, I thought, and I still think Epic High has the potential to, and back then also. So I think that Psy was fascinating, still is. Love Psy.
Okay, and then rolling it back to Jae, obviously around 2008, 2009, 2010, as a lot of Korean artists were starting to chart not only regionally but globally. Many of the artists that were just mentioned now, whether it was 21, Big Bang, Epic High, but one of the early Korean music artists that started finding chart success, not only in Japan, but more importantly in North America, was a band that you produced, Asiatics. So Jae, I was wondering if you could talk about your experience with Asiatics, the concept behind it, and then more importantly, how it led to an early attempt to actually break into the US market vis-a-vis through working with a major US record label.
Jae?
Your audio's off.
Yeah, I turned it off. I just kind of did the Clubhouse thing. But in 2010, it was for me, I wanted to like do an experiment of, trying to break K-pop outside of Korea, and I think right before then was like the Wonder Girls. And there was a few attempts to try to do that before. And my thing was like, I wanted to take a different approach. And one of the thing was like, I didn't want to work with famous people because I felt like, when you work with famous artists and they spend years in America, they're going to, get worried about like the money they're not making back home. Right. So I found 3 Korean American guys that could actually fit that role. And, my concept at the time, this is 2010, mind you. So back in 2010, I wanted to kind of present Korean music as kind of as is, except like some of the things that, actually the Westerners might find not so pleasing. So like we took away a lot of the colors. And, if you look at Asiatics packaging, it's usually all black and white. And they were always dressed very dark. And that was sort of the concept. And our concept was basically like Guns N' Roses, like, after the glam rock, backlash, they basically took the same music as glam rock and just took off all the makeup, right? And that created a whole new kind of perception of rock music going into the 90s, right? And led on to other things. And for us, we I think the key thing was that we started promotions outside of Korea. We didn't start in Korea. And I think in many ways, BTS did the same thing, where actually they tapped into K-pop fans outside of Korea. Because at the time, there was way more like fan base outside of the domestic market, like outside of Korea. So that was the market that we tapped into as well. And, and after, doing world tours and things like that, we gradually came back into Korea and got on TV and did it backwards. And that was sort of our method to do it. And we were I think we were one of the first K-pop bands to get signed to a major label in the U.S. We got signed to Cash Money Records. I'm technically an indie label, but they were one of the biggest labels in the world at the time. And and Nicki Minaj, Drake was just blowing up, and Lil Wayne, everybody was there. And then we got the call, and then that's where we ended up. And I think it was just a huge learning experience for all of us. And it was kind of like, going into uncharted territory. So like we didn't know what was coming up next, and everything was a gamble. Everything was a risk. We had no, like predecessors to set sort of a path, right? So we had to really figure things out as we went.
So, Dr. Kim, it's almost been a decade since the first wave, the first generation of K-pop acts were trying to break out in international markets, but in particular, the biggest market in the world, the US. What do you think has changed over the past 10 years that might have perhaps maybe stifled or might have frustrated earlier K-pop acts? What do you think has changed, be it in the market or be it in the media? Or perhaps even in the music, that has allowed for K-pop acts such as BTS, such as Blackpink, and many, many others to find success in the US, to find more mainstream appeal in the US. What are maybe, say, 3 factors that you think have changed over the past decade that have enabled K-pop music to really become part of the US pop music landscape?
Wow. Well, first of all, definitely the commercial appeal. I mean, it's not just the music, but the whole, the gravity of music, that could bring people together. I think industry, the critics, journalists, even scholars are paying attention to that right now. So I think the amount of attention has been the thing that had changed much. So people started really seriously think about K-pop, and not just the music, but the whole concept and the world, and even the definition of the world. So, for instance, I always think this is an incredible change, because back in early 2000 and in the mid 2000, not many artists, not many Asian or Korean American artists consider themselves as K-pop, because back then K-pop was simply an idol music, and so genre musicians and other type of like rappers and R&B musicians would be kind of hesitant to call themselves a K-pop musician, a K-pop artist. But now, as K-pop is getting global attention, many people willingly, wanted to be included in the scene, in the K-pop scene, because K-pop is right now not as a sub-genre of Western music, but more of a kind of individual, like potential industry or sub-industry of global music. So I think that's the really big change. And I think the whole discourse surrounding K-pop's been really serious since then. Right now, notice scholars and philosophers and college professors, they are really paying attention to the nature of K-pop and the history of K-pop. For instance, people started to read my book, written in Korean, not even in English, and they asked me a lot of questions. I mean, I think it's really great change. American media is like, Time, New York Times, and other like mainstream outlets. They really wanted to go. They really want to go deeper. They want to go beyond Psy, beyond BTS, beyond idol music, to talk about, Korean pop music as a whole. Not just idol music or idol industry. So I think That's the biggest change and shift. But the biggest factor definitely is the commercial appeal, because now people really started to realize that this is the thing that could potentially change the whole landscape of global pop music, not just K-pop as a kind of peripheral industry.
So Tamar, you obviously worked in the media for a long time at Billboard magazine, at other publications as well in the US, and you often had access to a lot of emerging artists coming from Korea. As someone who worked in the US media, particularly obviously the US music media side, what were some things that you saw perhaps improve over the years, perhaps certain best practices that might have been a little bit clumsy in the early days, but got more refined, more tuned, and more sophisticated and more savvy over the years? What did you feel were some of the improvements that K-pop, but more importantly, the artists and the management companies made in terms of their efforts to expand globally?
Definitely like the first thing is the way that artists were engaging with social media. Like first when YouTube was, launching the careers of some like groups like 21 back in like the late 2000s, social media was like, let's post something on Facebook and that's just going to be updating fans and that's it. But now, of course, you have daily engagement between fans and artists. So that evolution has been really impactful. And then media, so many stories nowadays come from like fan reaction on Twitter is this, or look at these funny memes from Instagram. So just like the engagement aspect has really changed in that regard. And I think the industry has kind of, and still is, struggling with very intense, latent Orientalism about like what's going on in Korea and the dark side of K-pop. Like you can literally Google and you can find articles with that title. But I think as like the media industry as a whole is recognizing not only its own lacks of diversity, but also recognizing like, the Western media audience isn't just, Westerners. So we need to look at the whole global audience. So I think more and more companies are looking at global data. Like I can see exactly which countries my articles are being read in. And I think that kind of access to awareness of who our audience is, who could be writing stories, whose stories we're not telling, has really enhanced a lot of things. I know this is very hypocritical as a white girl from New York, so like the most stereotypical journalist in the world. But we have a lot of conversations, even in the past few years, I've seen just like in the companies I've worked for, editorial make definite decisions to either hire more diverse voices or to ask contributors, hey, look, we have a story. We would love for you to write it. You're not the right person to write it. Who do you have in mind who could write this story? Which, a few years ago would not even be on the mind of the industry. And I think that's been something that's really good. And then I know you asked me something else. So from the K-pop side of things, I think the most important thing has been PR has had a big push. I don't know, Jay maybe could talk about this, like for Asiatics PR. I do remember seeing some press releases from you guys, but for most K-pop groups, when I first started writing, most companies didn't have PR in the US. Maybe they had, like if they were like SM or JYP or YG, they had a local office who kind of handled all their PR in the US. But then when BTS Around the Wings toured, they started hiring, a local company to do their PR. And now pretty much every single K-pop act looking to make it in the West has a huge PR company on hand, which means that the PR companies also are recognizing this and they're accepting them as clients. Because the story I've heard was that BTS's team had contacted a lot of different PR companies and they went to the one that responded because everybody else ignored them because nobody else wanted to take on a K-pop group at that time. And obviously that worked out really well for that company. But so those sort of things, those changes, I think, which are more like industrial, just the approach to content and the approach to dealing with different industries has really been fascinating to watch.
Jay, obviously not just as an artist, but as a producer with experience and expertise, not just only in Korea, but in Greater China as well. You've worked with a lot of acts that have been able to tour in the US, but more importantly, you've also worked with other artists who've attempted to break out in the US. One of the many artists that you worked with that comes to mind is Coco Lee from Hong Kong. And she was one of the early sort of pioneers in the Asian music scene who tried to make an effort to break into the US market. I was wondering if you could talk about sort of a very important aspect of this whole idea of globalization of K-pop, which is language. What do you feel is the right balance in terms of Asian language, English language, both musically, but more importantly, when it comes to marketing and promoting and presenting artists? Because obviously, over the years, we've seen some artists who feel, or who've been told actually by record labels, if you don't do it 100% in English, it will never work. It will fail in the US. But obviously with the success of Latin music, which has got a lot of Spanish, primarily in Spanish, and now with K-pop, which is sprinkled with a lot of Korean and sometimes predominantly Korean, this language argument really has been thrown out the window. So I was wondering if you could sort of talk about the importance of language, retaining, if it feels necessary, Asian language, and how much English is enough or too little or too much.
Yeah, the irony of that is, I think back in the day, almost every Asian was trying to assimilate and try to fit into the U.S. sort of, I don't know, like the market, but with the language aspect of it. The irony is that the biggest songs that we know, like Gangnam Style or any, like these big hit K-pop songs were actually done in the native language, right? So, but I think the importance of language goes to not just the music, but actual promotion, where it comes to interviews on TV, so like when people actually do engage with artists, there's some sort of personality and, some depth to, being the persona, right? So I think in that aspect, not only the language, but also kind of understanding the, so like just the cultural things as well, and being able to converse and all that stuff. So that, I think early 2000s or like in the 2010s, a lot of K-pop artists weren't even planning on K-pop being this big. So I don't think anybody really prepared for that. But now that it's become global, every K-pop band has an English speaker in it practically, right? So English, if you take after the Latin market, there's obviously Latin hit songs in the native language, but a lot of it is done in English as well. So, it's got to be, we got to be able to do both and sort of not just be a gimmick or kind of a thing passing through, but something to stay and have longevity. I think that requires connection with the people. That requires language.
So obviously when a lot of people talk about the success of BTS, it's helped, obviously. And the same is true with Blackpink. The fact that these are multilingual, multicultural artists where they feel comfortable singing it in Korean, obviously, Japanese, English, and whatnot. And, one of the things I wanted to sort of ask both Tamar as well as Dr. Kim, because both of you have written books on BTS. What do you feel are some of the best practices that have emerged from the case study of BTS that you think could be applied to not only other up-and-coming K-pop artists, but more importantly, to Asian music artists? What do you think are some best practice takeaways that you think could be applied successfully to others who are looking to replicate in some way, shape, or form the success of BTS? I'll start with Tamar, ladies first, and then we'll swing it over to Dr. Kim.
Thanks. I think probably the biggest thing that we're seeing other artists emulate both in Asia and beyond Asia is just how engaged BTS are with their fandom, and whether it's through social media or through engaging content like music videos or books or social media engagement like hunts. If you've never tried to find BTS's random Instagram about a flower shop that doesn't exist, like, you don't know what you're missing out on. But so that's sort of really engaging kind of multi-platform storytelling we see with a lot of like fictional forms of media, like the Avengers or like Star Trek, and long-term Star Wars, like you can have books and you can have movies and you can have TV shows and you can have all these things going across different platforms. And I think that BTS has kind of really delved into a new era of that, and other artists are starting to see it. You're starting to see, BTS, if you go back to their very earliest days on Twitter, they were literally just like chatting around with fans. And now, everybody has a different app platform to talk with fans directly. With the pandemic, we're seeing a lot of more video calls, and a lot of Western artists are doing this too, trying to figure out how to capture their brand engagement. So, obviously it's not necessarily all like brands. Sometimes it is just, this is the artist personality. So people like Cardi B, who's always on Twitter talking to people, like, even though, she's not necessarily the same sort of entertainer pop star as BTS is, or a K-pop group is, she's still very engaged with her fans. Chloe and Haley are really, really engaged on social media. It really helps, people who maybe don't know who they are see a post about them singing or performance or something. And I think that just the way that they've engaged has really kind of shifted how other artists are thinking about things and trying to, like, we're seeing a lot more intellectual property coming out of Hive Corporation, formerly Big Hit, which is home to BTS. And I think we're going to start seeing a lot more of that just generally as people try to kind of figure out, like, how do you, once you have the audience, how do you continue keeping the audience engaged? And so it's just really kind of a fascinating case study that I think that's kind of what we're seeing now. And like, even, Taylor Swift, who's been around, forever, well, ever before BTS, she's exploring a new part of her artistry kind of as like an independent person, but she's like, you can see that she's kind of posting more on social media. She's teasing her audience more. She's always been very engaged with her fans directly, but now she's kind of reaching out to larger audiences. And if there's a Taylor Swift fan in the audience and I'm totally off base, please let me know. But I think that just things like this, we're seeing a lot more direct engagement between artists and fans. And I think that's very, it's great for the experience for fans, but it's also really great for business. And I think that that's something that a lot of people are looking at right now.
So Dr. Kim, obviously when it comes to people talking about the success of BTS, social media, fan interaction has obviously been emphasized and stressed. I was wondering if you could perhaps maybe throw a little bit spotlight and build on not just BTS, but really the big hit, and now we have to call it Hybe, the business model. What do you think is unique, but more importantly, really innovative about the business model behind the building of BTS?
Yeah, I mean, it's really tricky to talk about because we, as an insider, as a critic, journalist, or producers, we there's a kind of tendency we talk about kind of some strategy or secret ingredient to emulate and applicable to other cases. But I think one of the real success story of BTS in US, in Korea, is in their story. Is a story of them, story in the music. I think this whole story and narrative, I think it goes beyond the sound and visuals. So that's why I, personally consider BTS as a kind of latest evolution of K-pop, because K-pop's been around the scene for a very long time, and we already know what's the strength of the K-pop and what's the kind of commercial potential of the K-pop. Their visual, they're really well-trained vocals and raps, and the high, the top tier, artists and composers collaborated through Songcamp and others. They already established that system, in other company, SMYG, JYP. They're the front runners. But all of a sudden, Big Hit, small company, made this group. When the BTS made a debut, everybody was laughing. The whole concept, hip hop idol, was something that many hardcore hip hop fans would tease about and mock about. And the idea of bringing these two different elements together, on the one hand, there's authenticity of hip hop, and in the true believable storytelling about who you are, where you're from, who you're representing. It's definitely a hip hop thing. Then on the other hand, you definitely had a formula as a K-pop, well-trained vocal, group performance, in-house producers producing really consistent material. So they brought these two elements together successfully, but actually nobody, I still believe that even producer Bang Xie was doubtful whether this will work, eventually, even in the global market. But I think it also tells a lot, because we talk about strategy, company, M&A and those kind of things. But eventually the thing that really can move people is music and the performance and it's just a little sort of difference in music and emotions within the music. So I think that the real power of BTS is their really kind of delicate, emotional, nostalgic, kind of sad music that could bring, a lot of different people together. I was always surprised by the fact that BTS has the most diverse fandoms, ethnicity, race, ages. So I think the most critical reason is that for their success is the universality of the music. So I think that's the kind of teaching that industry people maybe consider seriously, because we definitely have a system, great like connection within the business, but at the same time we go back to the basic, and we should try to make, not we, and I'm not a producer, but yeah, they have to figure out what's gonna be kind of authentic, the components that people believe that this is not a made in the factory. This is real. This is a music of actual person who sings it. So one of the interesting strategy ways of Big Hit and Hive, when they produce BTS is, I think it's artistic freedom. They, consciously allow BTS members to be part of the production, be part of lyrics writing, be part of the beat making, be part of fan engagement. Well, back before BTS, social media, everybody had the same platform, but social media is more, more of just one of those kind of PR promotion type of posting. But BTS uses it as a very personal platform to directly engage with fans and directly communicate with fans. So I think that little difference, I think the little like subtle different perspective of how to use social media, how to make music, how to convince fans to believe that the music is more organic, not just out of factory music kind of thing. Yeah.
Jae, I wanted to sort of roll with and follow up on what Dr. Kim was talking about, was this idea of the artist producer. I think for myself included and many of us in the industry, we cringe a little bit, actually hesitate calling BTS a boy band, because the term, the idea of boy band is often just dismissed as they're celebrities, they're performers, they're actually not artists. And I think, the wide appeal of BTS with particularly the fans and especially with critics is they are, as Dr. Kim mentioned and Tamar also talked about as well, is the fact that they're really actually artist producers and singer-songwriters. And often with the artists that you've worked with, that's also very much kind of a similar style that you work with and work for when collaborating with artists. I know in the West, a lot of people initially were a little bit hesitant to recognize, let alone respect K-pop, because there was this stereotype, a perception, perhaps maybe even a misinformation that somehow K-pop equals boy band, girl band, equals teen idol music, equals factory music, that this is just something that's just spit out by production houses, and in some way, shape, or form, these kids are exploited. But I was wondering, as you were producing Korean and Asian music acts, what were sort of the stereotypes that you had to confront and deal with in terms of perception related to music coming out of Asia? But more importantly, kind of your thoughts about, the rise of audition shows, because I think, that just in many ways highlights sort of kind of the dichotomy of K-pop music industry.
Sure. I think, if you just look at the history of K-pop, I don't know, like even since the 90s, it's not just like a few boy bands or girl bands either. I mean, there's like literally thousands of them, right? And so to set yourself apart from them, the only way is to sort of take what's already there. You don't want to reinvent the wheel, but you take what's already there. And that was sort of my approach with Asiatics. It was to take what was already there and add certain things that people didn't like about K-pop. Number one being the fact that the perception is that there's a man in charge, like a dictator, and he just dictates everybody's music, and all the artists have to sort of go with this program. And the fact is, a lot of that is actually true in our industry. And for me, I always felt like, if the producer acted more as a mentor and sort of took the back seat when it comes to writing the music and actually had the artists participate, that would take the artists like 10 times further than trying to manufacture them, And once our music started to go to the Western market, in the Western market, authenticity is everything, right? So, if you're trying to bring a group of, K-pop bands that are completely manufactured, eventually there's going to be a backlash, right? So, and over here, even I think, even with the bands that are here, like in the 90s, whether it's like NSYNC or Backstreet Boys or whatever, everybody always felt like, oh, these guys are all manufactured, had producers write their songs, da da da. And that sort of carried over to K-pop as well. And BTS actually broke that stereotype and showed that, hey, you could have the lights and the glitz and be in the creative as well. Like have, best of both worlds, right? Like whereas before you had to sort of be the artsy fartsy or complete manufactured, circus, right? So now like you could have the lights and the flair and be, and respected as an artist. And these guys are actually writing the music, and they're, and music is a form of expression, right? At the end of the day, like Dr. Kim said, all the marketing, mobile joke, like all that stuff is secondary. And in fact, the ones that really hit just hit naturally without any of that, really. And at the end of the day, we're in the business of selling art, and I think BTS is actually like show that it could go a long way on both ends of the cycle, like being visual as well as creative, and that's what did it.
And then just we're running close to the time. It went so quickly. So I wanted to throw this last question by Tamar. Is obviously working on the media front lines. I'm sure off the record, behind closed doors, you heard maybe perhaps a little bit of the doubts, maybe skepticism. Is this K-pop thing for real? What is this? Are we supposed to pay attention to it? Oh my goodness, the numbers are going higher. The clicks are getting bigger. How do we deal with this? How do we handle this? Like, what is it that is making this popular? What was some of the initial, resistance to K-pop that you perceived or heard or knew about, and then how it perhaps shattered or evolved or wore down over the years? What do you think were some of the biggest hurdles? And then more importantly, what do you think sort of helped bring K-pop into more mainstream awareness and dare say maybe even appeal?
Yeah, so from the media side of things, definitely the resistance is still there. Like, as we were talking about, like the idea of authenticity is huge in the West, and there's still so much stigma and stereotypes about what K-pop artists are or they aren't, and what idols are or they aren't, regardless of like actually, delving into trying to sort out what is the truth and kind of just the stigma and stereotypes. And I think what is the most impactful thing that we've seen is kind of media insiders have either shifted their opinions or new people have come into the scene. So if you look at big outlets, like, legacy music outlets, like Pitchfork still doesn't really cover K-pop all that often. Rolling Stone, it took a really long time. Like, I think I just saw a report that Rolling Stone America might be having a BTS cover magazine in June. But that's, BTS has been around for ages already, since 2013. So I wrote a piece two years ago, I think, for Forbes about how the MTV VMAs like never acknowledged Psy's, success as for having one of the most successful music videos of all time. And then again, they created a K-pop category to other BTS for their first nomination. Like, obviously, these things are still happening and they're still growing, but I think just the industry kind of, I post about this on Twitter a lot. The industry is becoming more and more aware of its lacks, and kind of some people are either choosing to fix it and some people are kind of choosing to dig in their heels. And in the music industry, and like the music aspect of journalism is kind of the same. So we're seeing, I've definitely been in meetings within the past 3 years where certain editors are just like, oh, when is K-pop trend going to end? It's not real music. I want, real music to kind of come back. And then, those were always male editors. And then there's almost always a female editor or a female writer, who's just like, what's your issue with something that, women predominantly like what's your issue with pop music? What's your issue with boy bands or girl groups or idols, or just, the idea of, this isn't a grungy rock band. Like, I hear so many times, music has been dead since rock, lost popularity. And it's just like, well, why do you think that? Because as Jay mentioned, we're like, this is the industry of selling art. So if your audience is responding, then the art is resonating. And, obviously BTS have really proved that. But I think the industry is still kind of trying to sort out, how do you talk about music when maybe your experience as a journalist, as a media outlet, doesn't reflect that. Like, obviously, Pitchfork is a great outlet, but not every song that Pitchfork reviews is going to be a huge hit. So how does Pitchfork remain their integrity as, this outlet that has a specific taste, when maybe that's not what audiences are really interested and engaged in anymore? So we're seeing a lot of change within the industry, and there's a lot of evolution, and there's still a lot of backlash, but there's also, a lot of good change.
Oh, thank you so much, Tamar. We have already kind of close to wrapping up. And so I just got an avalanche of questions. And so what I'd like to do is steer the conversation and discussion more into the Q&A side. If I'm not making good eye contact, it's because a lot of questions came in. I'm trying to screen which ones we can get to and touch upon. I'd like to send the first question to Dr. Kim, and it's essentially in relation to the amazing pivot and the amazing sort of, live streaming. Obviously, during COVID, K-pop, BTS, many big Korean music companies and acts made a huge move into live streaming. Do you feel that what we saw in Korea, the technology solutions and sort of the creative expressions in the live streaming space, do you think it's here to stay? And more importantly, what were some takeaways that the rest of the music industry can learn from the K-pop Korean live streaming experience? Oh, Professor Kim, your mic is off. You went into Clubhouse mode.
Yeah, Clubhouse mode, like Jay. Yeah, it's tough to predict because we're in the COVID situation, and we're dealing with the new technology. But the new technology we're talking about is already developed for for the future industry, not just for COVID. So the online performance streaming, live chatting and matrix type of like the setting is not tailor-made for COVID. So so for me, well, no, this is the only option for the audience that they can choose right now. So I'm not really I'm not really believing that this online performance itself would replace everything, every like physical performance or in-person concert in the future, because it is not. I mean, people still want to go there, meet them in person, interacting with other fans too. So online performance for me is a kind of one subgenre of performance type. So I think the consumers are actually realizing that right now, because they're kind of used to the setting, used to the things happening in the online concert. So they started to regard it as an individual type of performance type, not a substitute for the actual concert. And also one other thing is that I'm not sure that this online concert thing can be for everyone. I mean, everyone in the business, every artist in the business. For instance, indie rock, R&B, hip hop would not really benefit from that online performance type, because it is really specifically for now that online performance and the benefit and the strength of the type of concert is for the more visual style of performance. For instance, K-pop idol, boy band, girl groups. So I think it's another genre, more of another genre, rather than the kind of like performance or concert that replace the previous physical concert.
This next question I'm going to throw to Jae, and this is a good one. And usually this is something we talk about over soju and samgyeopsal, but we're going to have to do it dry with coffee and some snacks. But it has to do with collaborations. One of the things that a lot of people often point to in terms of the success of K-pop is the quantity, but more importantly, the quality of collaborations. And I was wondering, Jae, if you could talk about what collaborations you think make the most sense, be it creatively or commercially, and the importance of collaboration. Do you think an act can strike out solo, go on their own and be 100% successful doing it 100% their way? Or do you feel that collaboration is really a necessary stepping stone to find success in international markets?
I think collaboration is, definitely a tool to use, especially when you're trying to introduce yourself to a new market. The best way to get yourself out there is to collaborate with somebody that's already a known name and out there. But in terms of BTS collaborations, I think it's helped the U.S. artists even more than the BTS themselves. In many ways, and I think and I think people are realizing that now. So before, I used to do collabs with artists from Asia here, all that, and in most cases, the U.S. artist has zero interest, in who the artist is. They'll just go through the motion and do it. And the only way a true collaboration can happen is when there's mutual respect, right? And only mutual respect only happens when you see a potential on the other side as well. Right. And now K-pop is getting bigger. The U.S. artists are now seeing that, like, if they collaborate with the K-pop artist or even take a picture on Instagram or something, they get, hundreds of thousands of new followers. Right. And then so now they're buying into the whole thing as well. So, and it's just like the word itself. It's a collaboration. It has to be a mutual thing, a respectful thing between two creative artists. And I think that could be really explosive. There's been a lot of cases where, like collaborations really didn't help either party, right? Because it's just completely two different demographics and doesn't do anything for either market. But, there's been some good ones.
Okay, this next question I'm going to give to Tamar, because you actually wrote an article about this a while ago, is CDs. One of the things that came out in the IFPI report is Korea has now emerged as the second largest CD market in the world. It just surpassed the United States and is behind Japan now. And then during COVID, Korea actually saw a massive spike in CD sales to basically help these K-pop artists get through these troubled and tough times. One of the sort of trivia facts out there that all BTS Army fans know, but many others who don't, is the fact that this year wasn't the first time BTS was actually nominated for a Grammy. Their first nomination actually was for, I believe, album packaging for their CD. I was wondering, Tamar, if you could talk about the importance of CDs in the K-pop music scene and in the K-pop music industry, and what CDs mean to both the fans and the artists.
Yeah, for sure. I love talking about CDs. I go buy CDs way too often. It is terrible for the environment. But before I address that, I just want to jump on Dr. Kim's point about online concerts not necessarily being great for other genres, just because right now I'm like a big fan of versus the hip hop, and like it's like R&B and soul, like a lot of artists just having performances, and there's one just going on right now. So I just wrote a research paper actually that I'm presenting at a conference next week about K-pop and online concerts. So I think it's definitely something we're going to be thinking and talking about if the pandemic ever ends. But I think definitely like it's the way that idols are doing it is definitely different than other people, but there's definitely a lot of potential. And I think that idea of like idols are doing it, but there's also a lot of potential is definitely something that a lot of people are thinking about right now regarding album packaging. Because right now, when, as you mentioned, album sales have kind of skyrocketed this year for K-pop and Korea as a whole, it's kind of coming at a time when fans maybe have more spending power than usual on kind of something that's not an experience, because you can't really go out and experience a lot of things. So you're going to start buying things. And that's kind of one of the reasons that people are thinking there's a higher album sales this year. But album sales, like when you get a K-pop album, it's an experience. Like it's a little box of goodies that you're opening for yourself. There's all these photo cards. There's different pictures of your favorite artists. It's like a whole magazine photo shoot. Different albums have different content in them. You know, it's like opening up, like if you're not a music fan, like I imagine opening up like as a kid, like a pack of like trading cards or something, like to see if you get, like when I was younger, like getting the shiny Pokemon cards was always a big thing. So I think that the collecting experience is something that really feels great for the fans, but it also helps the artist because it and it's a good experience for fans because you're feeling like you're literally propelling the artist's career. If I buy albums, that will help my favorite artist chart, and that will help their career. So it's like you actively are investing rather than through stock, but through albums. So now you get this nice product, but you also get to kind of be a partner in the relationship with your favorite star and help their career. And we do see, fans really take that like seriously. Like nowadays you see like fan strategies like, okay, every fan needs to buy this many albums and this many you need to stream on this platform. And of course, I wrote recently a piece I recently moved to Hong Kong to take a job at the South China Morning Post, and we just did a piece investigating kind of the potential environmental impact of all these plastics and all these streaming. And honestly, at the end of the day, everybody's point was, yeah, it's bad, but consumers really can't fix anything. It's all onto the companies. And like, don't feel terrible about enjoying some part of life because capitalism is evil. So that was kind of an interesting article to talk about when you're talking about, millions of copies of albums being sold every year. So I think that's definitely, from the artist perspective, it's something that helps their career. From the fan perspective, it's something you can enjoy and engage actively in an artist's career in a way that is direct and kind of, it's a nice thing. It's like, why do you pre-order a book when an author is writing it? It's so that you can kind of let them know, I want to support this. And the same thing with albums, and they're beautiful. Like I have a shelf behind me over here of my K-pop albums that I've bought since I came to Hong Kong. And like each one is different. Each one has its own art form. The production of them is like a whole separate art form that goes alongside the K-pop production itself. And I think it's something that definitely is unique to K-pop, and people really are starting to like, oh, maybe we can learn from that.
Okay, thank you, Tamar. And then we're going to end with the last question, and it's a great one, actually, and I'd like to have Dr. Kim touch on it. I'll just read it right off the screen because I don't think I can say it better. As the K-pop audience becomes more diverse and global, should the K-pop industry become more diverse and global as well? Dr. Kim, what's your opinion on this? And then and then I'll have Jae jump on at the back end to wrap it up.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, K-pop, from industry side, K-pop companies and labels, they're not, well, even when they are promoting their songs and music to the global audience, they're not, honestly, they were not really paying attention to the global audience. You know, they're sometimes very insensitive, you know, in a lot of different ways, like race and ethnicity, cultural appropriation and things like that, you know, because one thing is they didn't really know how to do that. And the second of all, they were not really paying attention to the diversity of fans. So definitely right now, K-pop is happening, you know, simultaneously, you know, in a global scale. So there's no really, you know, time lapse at this point. You know, YouTube's doing everything, you know, the promotion and, you know, launching songs and new projects through YouTube and social media. So actually the global audience is consuming K-pop without any delay simultaneously. You know, sometimes foreign audience or international audiences would find a certain artist before Korean audience find them, or sometimes global audience, you know, would make a certain group a superstar before their mother country, you know, find them. You know, BTS is that case. So I think right now it is definitely the label's responsibility and also, you know, commercially as well. It is very good for them to understand the diverse demand, diverse needs from the global audience, because they're dealing with many different people. You know, the K-pop, they really have to realize that K-pop is not local. It's not just market, but the people they're dealing with, you know, the music they're targeting to. So, well, so in that regard, I'm really glad that right now some companies, not every company, but some companies having a program, like cultural program, to teach their artists, you know, what the certain like kind of sensitive issues in terms of like race and ethnicity and global issues, and you know, make sure that their artists, you know, need to learn about the culture, not just music, not just the sound or production, but the culture itself. And I think it's a really important step forward and important tactic as well. Yeah.
Jae, can you take us down the home stretch? Any words of wisdom, any pearls that you can drop on us?
I totally agree with Dr. Kim. You know, we definitely need to go more global on a bigger scale. Right now, you see like maybe a handful of companies that are actually actively, you know, like pursuing international markets. The fact is, the other 99% are not. Right. And a lot of people, it's not their intention not to be. Some people just have never left their neighborhoods that run K-pop companies. Right. And I think you and I, Bernie, we always talk about this, how like the Korean music industry lacks executive, you know, level people to run the industry. We need people that are educated, cultured in other areas, about other countries. And, and we need artists who could be cultured as well, to kind of go abroad and be sensitive to people outside of Korea. And I think that's definitely something that we need to do on a bigger scale.
And on that note, I think we have to wrap up. We got so many great questions. We couldn't touch on all of them, but hopefully we can do this again, perhaps not on Zoom, but in person. But with that, I want to thank all of you for taking time out from your very busy schedules to share this discussion with all of us all around the world. And with that, I would like to drop the mic and hand it off to Charlie. Thank you so much.
Bernie, thanks so much to you and Dr. Kim and Tamar and Jae for an engaging and insightful journey through the world of K-pop and BTS. BTS being, you know, a group that Asia Society had actually honored last year as an Asian game changer. This is a topic that I think we'll be visiting over and over again and many times in the future. So we look forward to the next conversation with all of you. We'd like to thank, besides our partners at Korea Asia Society Korea, we'd like to also thank our promotional partners, the Korean American Center, the Center for Korean Studies, the KCC LA Los Angeles, and the Korean American Community Foundation. They've been a great part of helping promote this program and to bring our audience in with these amazing questions and great insight that we've been able to share today. I also like to let you know about our next program that we will be putting on. It'll be Standing Against Racism in the Time of COVID, a conversation on activism, which will be Thursday, May 6th, 5:30 to 6:30 p.m. in Los Angeles, which is the next day from 8:30 in Hong Kong or 9:30 in Korea. We hope that you will join us. We have an amazing lineup of speakers, which will be moderated by Connie Chung Jo from the organization Asian Americans Advancing Justice Los Angeles. So on that note, I'd like to encourage people to become a member or to donate to Asia Society. We make these programs free for the audience, and if you'd like to help support us to continue this, we'd be deeply grateful. So thank you again to everybody, and thanks for an amazing conversation tonight, and look forward to the next one. Thank you. Good night.